Hi, David here, and welcome back to the channel, where we're looking at the teaching of divine love through the automatic writings of the early 20th century medium James Padgett. In this series of videos, starting with 10.1, we look at messages James Padgett received from Jesus and those closely associated with him. For the moment, we're keeping the focus upon Jesus himself. So today we're looking at a message James Padgett received on June 7, 1915, just 5 days after the one we looked at last Sunday in video 10.5. This message is a fascinating one because in it, Jesus shares an account of his birth and early life prior to embarking upon his public ministry at the age of 33. For those of you who have grown up with the traditional biblical account of Jesus' birth, there are some interesting corrections and some surprising confirmations. So let's jump in. The message begins, "I am here, Jesus. I want to write to you tonight about my birth and life up to the time of my public ministry. I was born in Bethlehem, as you know, in a manger. And when I was a few days old, my parents took me to Egypt in order to avoid the soldiers of Herod, who were sent to destroy me, and who did kill a great number of male infants, less than 2 years of age. Matthew 2:16. A lot of people have questioned whether Herod the Great did in fact order the killing of young male children, but it seems that he did. From subsequent messages, it seems that he was alerted to the possible birth of a predicted Messiah and feared for his own position, thinking this Messiah would replace him as ruler. As to how he was alerted, we will see that in a future message. Jesus continues, "The Bible story of my birth and the flight of my parents to Egypt and the murder of the innocents is substantially correct." Matthew 2:14. And I only wish to add to it that when my parents arrived in Bethlehem, they were not compelled to seek the manger of a stable in order that I might be born on account of poverty, for they were supplied with funds and everything that was needed to make my birth comfortable for my mother. And as a matter of fact, my father was not poor in the world's goods, as poverty was considered in those days. We know from a subsequent message that the inn was owned by someone Joseph knew, but that it was already full, and that Joseph declined to put anyone out. So they made themselves comfortable in the stable. Also, Joseph was able to buy food and drink from the innkeeper, so they didn't go hungry. So nothing to do with Joseph being poor, at least by the standards of the day. The next part of the message is intriguing, as Jesus goes on to say, "The Bible says the wise men came and brought offerings of gold and frankincense to my parents," Matthew 2:11, or rather to me. "But my parents have told me that it did not amount to so very much, so far as the money value was concerned, and that their expenses of fleeing to Egypt were met by the funds that my father had prior to his reaching Bethlehem." So these three wise men, magi, Babylonian astrologers, are indeed part of the story. We will see more detail on the story behind their journey, but it's the one part of the story about Jesus' early life that still seems magical, even after many of the other embellishments are discarded. In order to arrive at the time of Jesus' birth, they must have set off quite some time prior to it in order to make the journey. So when and why did they leave their home? And how did they end up finding the right child? Lots of interesting questions to be answered in the weeks ahead. Anyway, to return to this message, Jesus continues, "Upon our arrival in Egypt, my father sought the home of a Jewish relative who lived in Heliopolis, a town not far from Cairo. He welcomed us and enabled our family to make our start in this new land. There was quite a community of Jewish people there, and we congregated together for safety as well as for social life. There was a place for worship, a place for the cleansing of women, and also an elementary school for the teaching of reading and writing to enable youngsters to learn the scriptures. So Joseph didn't just take the family to Egypt on a whim, because we see that he has a reason for choosing it, having a relative he can seek help and support from. So we're starting to see that this is a family with an extended network of connections and the means to travel. I lived in Egypt myself for a couple of years and have visited Heliopolis, which is now effectively a suburb of Cairo. Heliopolis is a Greek name, which means city of the sun, Helios being the Greek sun god. So Egypt at this time serves as a place of refuge for Joseph's family. We're talking 7 BC, so Egypt is still nominally independent, unlike Palestine, Israel. Because there's an existing Jewish community in Heliopolis, Joseph and Mary are soon able to settle into a new life there. Jesus continues, "My father pursued his occupation as a carpenter to support us. After a while, he was able to set up and establish his trade quite successfully, and made his household a successful one, with all the conveniences available to workmen of the day. He supported my family to the extent that he educated myself and my brothers and sisters. For I had 4 brothers and 3 sisters, who were all, except myself, born in Egypt." Now we know from the conventional historical record that Jesus had siblings, but it's interesting hearing him describe himself as the eldest of 8. The one slight uncertainty we have here is that there is a more recent message which indicates that Jesus had 5 brothers and 2 sisters, even as the messages agree on him being the eldest of 8. Names and numbers can sometimes be a bit tricky to convey through a medium. So as we're going through the Padgett messages, just keep this little question mark in mind as we look for confirmation. To return to the message, Jesus has mentioned that there was an elementary school in the Jewish community in Heliopolis. When I became of proper age, I attended the common school provided for small children, and was taught those things that had to do with the religion of the Jews, and some things that were not religious in their nature. I was never taught the philosophy of the Egyptians, or of the other pagan philosophies. And when it is stated that I received my religious ideas or moral teachings from any of these philosophers, they are mistaken. My education as to these matters of religion was derived from Jewish teachers. As you may know, there are a lot of suggestions that Jesus travelled and gathered knowledge from many religious traditions, but here we see him discounting all such suggestions. He continues, "My development in the knowledge of the truths which I taught during my public ministry was caused by my inner spiritual faculties. And my teacher was God, who, through his angels and through my soul perceptions, caused those truths to come to me, or rather the knowledge of them, and in no other way did I obtain it." So the point he's making here is that anyone looking for earthly answers as to how he came by his inner knowledge is not going to find the answer. He did not wander the earth looking for the right teachers. Jesus is quite clear that his spiritual understanding came through his own soul development, and his gradual ability to perceive things up to the soul level which then became conscious knowledge for him. I was not born with the knowledge that I was the Son of God, sent to earth to teach these great truths, or to announce to humankind the rebestowal of the great gift of immortality and the means of acquiring it. This knowledge of my mission came to me after I became a man and had frequent communions with God through my spiritual senses. So Jesus is not talking here of intellectual knowledge or formal learning, but he is talking of an awareness that he acquired over time. This is knowledge that came to him as he developed his spiritual awareness, psychic or mediumistic ability, the soul awareness that is beyond language. So as for everyone else, soul development for Jesus was a process. He did not come into this world with the awareness he developed later as an adult. As Jesus says, I was never in the presence of the Jewish priests, expounding to them the law and asking questions when about 12 years of age, as stated in the Bible, Luke 2:46. It was not before my first appearance, after I became a man, did I attempt to show priest or layman that I was the messenger of the Father, and sent by him to proclaim the glad tidings of immortality restored, and of the great love of the Father, which was necessary to make all men at one with him, and to give them a home in his kingdom. I was never a sinful boy or man, and did not know what sin was in my heart. And strange as it may seem, I never sought to teach others these truths, until after my mission was declared by John the Baptist. In my boyhood days, I was the same as other boys, and engaged in the plays of childhood, and had the feelings of a child, and never thought I was anything else than a child. In no wise was I different from other children, except in the particular that I have named, and any account of me to the contrary is untrue. So we have a very clear statement of what was, in many respects, a typical childhood, but characterized by a process of soul development that continued into adulthood, and which eventually led to an awareness of the teachings Jesus later sought to share. My teachings were those that my Father had committed to me from the beginning, which I was only conscious of after I became a close communicant and learned from him my mission. So you must believe that I was a son of a man as well as a son of God, and that in the literal sense. I would not have been true to my mission had I claimed that I was the only Son of God, for it is not true, and men should not teach it. So although there are elements in the biblical story that are true, there are some which are not, and we are specifically told here to discount any suggestion of a virgin birth. I know it was said that my mother was told the object of my birth, and what a blessed woman she was, but this is not true. My mother, as she has told me, had no reason to suppose that I was different from other children born of men. The story of the angel of God coming to her and telling her that she must submit to the birth of a child who would be begotten by God or by his Holy Spirit, and that she, as a virgin, should bear and give birth to that child, Luke 1:35, is not true. She never in all her life told me that she had any such visitor, and I know that she would be as much surprised as are many others that such a thing as the birth of a child by a virgin could take place. So you see, the Bible account of my being begotten and all the attending circumstances are not true. My father, Joseph, never supposed at any time that I was not his child, and the story of the angel coming to him and telling him that he must not put her, Mary, away because of appearance, Matthew 1:20, is not true, because he never in all my conversations with him intimated that I was other than his own child. So not only was Jesus himself unaware that he was to become a spiritual teacher, but the same was true of his parents, except that we do have the visit of the Magi, the astrologers, at Jesus' birth, which, as we shall see in a future message, did put the spark of a hope into Joseph's mind. But we are told clearly to put aside any suggestion that Joseph or Mary had any doubts as to Jesus' parentage, whether as a result of visits from angels or otherwise. These are just later embellishments. Between the time that I was 12 years of age and my public ministry, I lived at home with my parents and assisted my father in his profession as a carpenter. And during all this time, no hint ever fell from him that I was not his child, or that I was different from other children, except that I did not do sinful things. That final comment is an interesting one. Jesus has mentioned a couple of times that he did not do sinful things, had no notion of what sin was, etc. This is expanded upon in future messages, but just keep in mind for the moment that there was something at work that kept Jesus from doing or even contemplating some of the things that come readily to other minds and hearts. He was able to keep from stumbling, let us say. Jesus goes on to explain that when I commenced to get this divine love into my soul, I became very close to the Father. And this relationship resulted in my realizing that I was sent by God with a mission to perform and a great and important truth to declare. And at last the voice in my soul told me that I was my Father's true son, and I believed it, and commenced to teach and preach the truths of his love bestowed and the salvation of humanity. So once again, we see a process underway which eventually results in a realization. In talking of a voice in his soul, Jesus is not talking of an actual voice that one might hear, for God does not use earthly languages invented for our physical forms. Instead, he is talking of an influence that brings him to an awareness over time until he is sufficiently sure to embark upon his public ministry. I knew John the Baptist when I was a child growing up. He was my cousin, and we often played together, and afterwards discussed the truth of my mission and the way in which it should be made known to the world. John was a great psychic, and saw in his vision who I was and what my mission on earth was, and hence, when the time came, he made the announcement of my coming. He realized the difference in our missions and spoke of his not being worthy to unloosen my shoes. Yet he did not fully understand my mission and the great truth of the bestowal of immortality upon humanity. I first became the Christ when I was anointed by my Father, and that occurred at the time of my baptism by John. I, as the Christ, am different from myself as Jesus. Christ means that principle which the Father has conferred upon me, which made me at one with him in the possession of this great love. Christ is that love itself made manifest in me as man. This Christ principle is universal, just as is the Holy Spirit, but I am limited in my place of occupancy just as you are. In using the word principle, Jesus is indicating a universal power in action. The word Christ is used to indicate someone who fully shares in divine love. And the Christ principle is a way of referring to that universal love, present everywhere, waiting to be shared in by all. I hope that gets across something of what Jesus means when he distinguishes between himself as Jesus and himself as Christ. Someone who shares fully in divine love is still an individual person, but one who now shares in, or is made of, the substance of God, so that we are both of these. I say this as if it's easy, but even after I felt it was true, it still took me ages to get my head around it and find a form of words that made sense. But being an individual who also shares in divine love, God's substance, is shown by what Jesus goes on to say. I never, as Jesus, promised the great gift mentioned in the Bible, such as where 2 or 3 are gathered together, there I will be also. Matthew 18:20. For it would be impossible for me to be in all places at the same time. However, Christ, being without form or limitation, is omnipresent and consequently may fulfill my promise in this regard. Christ is as much alive today as ever, and was never crucified and never died. Well, I think you are too sleepy now to continue. I will continue in the near future. Your brother and friend, Jesus. So I hope that makes sense, or if not, that it's intriguing enough for you to want to hear more. Jesus brings this message to an end because he sees that James Padgett is tiring, but he continues this message the following evening, and that's what we will look at next Sunday. The next midweek video will look at a passage from an acquaintance of James Padgett by the name of Joe Shellington, sharing his experience of passing from this world and adjusting to life in spirit. It's quite a thought-provoking message because Joe doesn't have the easiest time of it in spirit, but it's a useful message to be aware of. So I hope to see you for one or other of those if you've enjoyed this video. Can I ask you to take a moment to like it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already? This all helps to spread knowledge of this material so that like-minded souls can benefit from it. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care in the meantime.